Okay, if you are here for the first time tonight, we've been talking for about 80 weeks now just about what sets a person up for addiction, what makes it really hard for people as far as recovery, and we've been just working our way through a lot of that stuff. And since it's a new year, I thought we'd just go in a little different direction, and I want to just go through the 12 steps that are originally given by AA. And so tonight is just going to be an intro to that. And it's going to be one of those talks that you have to put your thinking cap on. And so if you're not in the mood for think, you can have a half-hour nap. But the rest of you might want to follow along. But I want to present to you kind of what I would experience as a counselor. And I would picture somebody brand new to recovery, very first time, and they would come in to my office and say something like this: I've been going to AA and I've been told I need to do the steps and I need to get a sponsor and all of that stuff, and something in me is just uncomfortable. I don't know, something in me wants to resist that. Help me think it through. And so here's what I would encounter as I have dealt with people in relationship to the steps. And so on the very one extreme, you get the people that would say the steps are the best. The steps are the right and only way to recovery, and they are just extremely positive, some going to the extent of saying these steps are inspired by God, and that is somebody that's been greatly helped by the steps. On the flip side of that, though, I have had people come to me and they would say, I just have nothing but negative feelings in my interaction with people who are doing the steps or who promote the steps. And one of those would be somebody that comes into AA who has had zero background in regards to spiritual. And so when they hear the word higher power and God of our understanding, in their mind, they're thinking, this is way too religious for me. I'm out of there. And it's just a reaction to the constant talk about spiritual fitness and God and those kind of things. And so that's just too much for some, and I get that. And then I will get Christians, and actually people that have come to Finding Freedom, who will take me aside, and they are anti-12-step. They are totally opposed to it because they, as soon as they hear people saying, God of your understanding, they go, no, that's not right. You need to present Jesus as the only higher power, and anything that says God of your understanding is bad. And so they're just totally anti-12-step. And then others will come and say, why do you need 12 steps? All you need is the Bible. And then my response often to that is, well, if all you need is 12 steps, why do I see you carrying around a book on marriage? That you're looking for help on your marriage. Isn't the Bible good enough for that? And so their logic breaks down. But I would find that for many people, and I suspect some of you here tonight, hearing the term 12 steps causes you to ask some sincere questions. Where do they come from? What are they about? Why do they present what they do? And so what I deal with people who have gone to an AA meeting, let's say for the first, second, third time, and they hear somebody say, you need to do the steps are the only way. If you don't do that, you're never going to get recovery. And they try to ask questions and get told, don't be thinking for yourself, just do what you're told. Then they go, I'm confused. I have legitimate questions. And I say to people like that, I want you to be free to ask questions. And you may end up at the same conclusion as the person who's trying to shove it down your throat. Or you may look at it and say, you know what, not for me. But you need to be able to ask those deeper questions behind the 12 steps. And so that's what I want to do tonight as an intro. So where I think is a starting point is to get a big picture in your mind. And that is, when you look at AA or when you look at treatment centers and you look at other ways of doing recovery, what really is it about? What is it that they are trying to accomplish? And it really is, they want you to stay clean and sober. So the question becomes, okay, that's the big question. How does a person stay clean and sober? Well, that then leads to another question, which is, well, you can't answer the question of how to stay clean and sober unless you first understand the cause of addiction. Because if you don't understand the cause of addiction correctly, you're not going to understand the solution to addiction correctly. So as I work with people from all different types of spectrums, you end up with all kinds of different thoughts. And so the one way to look at it is that out there right now are what we would call models of addiction treatment. And those models are very different. And so let me just give you some of the stuff, and I'm not going to comment on my thoughts until I get to the end of it, but you might begin to spot things. So the first thing that I would hear, and you probably have heard, is addiction is simply a biological thing. And that's simply what they're saying is that you were born with an addictive personality, or you were born with a gene that says if you have one drink, you're an addict. And so addiction is simply that. It's a biological thing. Some would add to that and say, addiction is about chemicals in your brain. And so if you are raised or born with a chemical imbalance, you might be very susceptible to addiction. Or if you just put all the bad chemicals in from the drug, your brain will change chemistry and then you're an addict, and it's biological only. Okay, that's one. The second one is addiction is the result of social dynamics. And so the people there would say a young person who's insecure is susceptible to peer pressure, and so they go to a party or they smoke up or they drink just to belong, and it's all a social thing. Or teenagers party, and some end up addicts. It's just the social way of our culture. Okay, third one, psychological. That's the only way to explain addiction. That it's because of you growing up in the family you grew up in. And therefore you received parents who modeled for you how to cope, how to deal with life, and you just adapted whatever they did. And you accepted that and you have done it. Or you've been wounded by your family, you've been influenced by your family, or you have this very low self-esteem, or you're very poor when it comes to setting boundaries with people. That's why you're an addict. And then the final one is those who would say addiction is simply a spiritual thing. It's a person who's rebelled against God. Now, if you stop and think of that, all of those four that I've mentioned, what I want you to realize is if you go to different treatment programs throughout the city, most of them will be one of those things only or a blend of those things. If you want to look at just the peer pressure thing, there's a treatment center in Winnipeg that basically says addiction is the result of peer pressure. It's a learned behavior from social pressure. And so the thing you need to learn is to say no to peer pressure. And some of you are already knowing what I'm talking about. You'll get others that say addiction is simply a spiritual thing. Just get your rebellion with God straightened out and you're good. And you get all kinds of different blends of different things, and some emphasize different areas. And so that then becomes kind of what's out there. Okay, that leads to another question. Before we can say, is it all four? Is it a blend of the four? Is it just one of the four? We really have to understand what makes us human, what influences us in the decisions that we make. And so again, if you look at humanity, we got 5 parts to us. We're physical beings, intellectual beings, emotional beings, relationship beings, and spiritual beings. Most in our culture today would admit the first 4. Most in our culture today would not accept number 5. But I will just throw that in because that's part, in my mind, of the whole thing. So then when you begin to look at that, you then go to, okay, what determines how we act? What determines the personality that we have? So let me just give you a couple examples. Why does one person like pink and another person like blue? Why does one person learn best by listening and another person learns best by watching somebody? What makes that difference? What causes one kid to desire to be a fireman and another kid to desire to be a farmer? What makes that difference? So those are the kinds of things. And so the question is, well, are we just then kind of some chemical cocktail in our brain that determines that? I went to see a doctor, and he looked me square in the eye, and he says, you want to know something? Everything can be explained about people's behavior based on brain chemistry. So if I can change your brain chemistry, I can change you. And I thought, that's kind of a fatalistic view, isn't it? You act out of brain chemistry and so you can't help yourself? I'm not sure I like that idea. And so then you begin to wrestle with this. How does one affect the other? How do my emotions affect how I think? How does my thinking affect how I feel? How does my spiritual affect my deepest desires? All of that stuff. And so now you're beginning to understand why I say you're going to need your thinking caps on. Because and this is what I want you to hear. One of the things I love about working with addicts is this. It forces you to think deeply about life. And if you get somebody that just kind of spouts off some shallow, empty stuff, you go, nuh-uh, it doesn't work. I need something that I can really make sense out of. And so that's really what we're looking at in this whole thing. We're complex beings, and so where does addiction fit in? What is it the result of? So let me just take you to where I would land in this whole thing. I believe that addiction is a psycho, social, spiritual. In other words, addiction is the result of biology, but it's also the result of psychology, and it's also the result of relationships and social stuff, and it's also connected to spiritual. And if you don't factor in all four, you end up with trouble. Or if you focus on one more than the others, you end up with a distorted program, a distorted treatment program. And that's what makes me sad about so much that I see happening, is they just lock in on one thing and they say, fix this one area and you're good, without realizing there's a whole lot more to us and to addiction than just one thing. And that's why, in my mind, so many Christian approaches have been ineffectual, because they've just tried to say it's only a spiritual problem. And it's much more than that. Secondly, when it comes to understanding us as humans, we have to factor in that we are physical beings with physical desires. We are intellectual beings with the ability to think and reason. We are emotional beings that affect how we think in different ways. And we are relationship beings and spiritual beings. All of that has to be considered. So let me take you then to the next thing, okay? Because here's where we're going with all of this. How do all of these things play together to determine whether a person will change or not? Because what is really recovery? It's saying you used to live this way, you did all of this stuff, now you need to change and do this stuff. What determines or what causes a person to change? Do they need just information? Some would say that. I say they definitely need information, but not enough. Others say you just need to feel better about yourself. You need to have self-esteem, or you need to learn to love yourself. I say that has its place, but that in itself is not enough. Some say you need medication only. I say that has its place, but in itself not enough. Some, you just need to learn how to cope with life. Important, but not the only solution. Others, you just need to become a Christian, or you just need to heal from past wounds. And others would say, no, you don't even need to look at your past. and that kind of stuff. Or, don't even worry about that stuff. You just need to get into action and do the right stuff now. And some of you have heard all of those different things. And what I want you to understand is when you put all of that together, you start to get a more accurate picture of what's involved in change. It is a very complex thing. And so any treatment or any program that is going to be effective has to be giving people information and insight. They need to learn. They need to be taught. They need to develop healthy relationships. They need to begin to heal from their past. They may need medication and get their brain sorted out. They do need to learn to be comfortable with who they are. All of that is important. All of that has to be blended together. Let me just go to something for Christians. And if that's not you, again, have a little nap. If you want to understand, thanks. There's a little word or a big word in the Bible, and it's called sanctification. And if you've never heard of it before, don't worry about it. Or you may want to impress your friends with a new word you learn. Sanctification simply means this: how do I change from being unhealthy to being more healthy? Which in the Bible is, how do I change from being a self-centered, ego-centered person to becoming more like God? That's the process that is talked about in sanctification. Do you want to know basically what we wrestle with here at Finding Freedom? If you want a Bible term, is what does sanctification look like? So let me give you what I see as the key issue. When it comes to a person changing, what is God's part and what is my part? And this is where a lot of Christians and churches and Christian treatment centers, I think, get it wrong. Because what happens for a lot of people is you just need a Christian spiritual experience. Whether it is becoming a Christian or whether it is something with the Spirit involved with that, then you're good. And so you look to this experience, which basically says, God will do 100%, you just go along for the ride and you don't have to do a thing. Just show up and you're fixed. And there's a lot out there that are saying that. Others say, you know what, your struggles, that's just spiritual warfare. You got a demon talking to you, cast them out. And there's a lot of that out there, sad to say. Others say, there's a Bible verse that says, forget what's behind. And I always feel like asking them, I like that verse because then I don't have to remember my wife's birthday. Because the Bible says, forget what's behind. That's really bozo if you don't think about it. But they throw that out like, which means then I don't have to do anything in understanding how my past affected me. Just forget everything about it. And that is so dysfunctional and wrong. And then others say, it's all sin, just deal with sin. And you don't have to look at how the sin of others affected you, you just look at your own sin. And so that, for many people, all of that becomes, just let God do 100%, you don't have to do much. Do you want to know what I find as I look at the Bible and as I really come to wrestle with human sanctification and how we change? The Bible does this. You need God's help 100%, but you have to give 100% of your energy and your work, and it's blood, sweat, and tears. And as soon as you take one of those and make it less than it should be, so you say 100% God, 50% me, you end up in trouble. It has to be, God, I have to work with all of my heart and energy and change and heal and make better decisions and learn how to cope. I got to pour tons of energy into that. I'm willing to do it, but man, if you don't show up and give me the strength, I'm screwed. And so, God, I'm willing to give 100%, but I sure need you to give 100%. And so it's a dual effort that requires 100% me with 100% God. Now let me take you then to the 12 steps. Because here's what you find as you work through the 12 steps. The 12 steps say this: recovery is a bio-psycho-social spiritual endeavor. Exactly what I've just explained. They say that you have to look at your biology. You have to look at your whole psychological makeup. You have to look at your relationships and your past, and you need God as part of that. That's included in the steps. In other words, what the steps are saying is if you want to get recovery, you have to become healthy physically, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. That's what it's saying. The 12 steps are saying recovery is not saying only I quit. Recovery is saying I quit, now I got to get healthy. Because if I don't get healthy, I won't stay quit for long. Because my unhealthiness will draw me back into addiction. And so the steps are saying if you want recovery, you have to get healthy in all areas of your life. It's a process, and it takes hard work, and it takes change, and it takes going into painful areas that I would rather not go into. So if you want kind of my take on just the big picture about the 12 steps, the 12 steps provide, in my mind, a balanced approach to recovery. They provide the emphasis that recovery involves all of you, and it involves becoming healthy, and it involves a lot of work and change. It's not the only path to recovery. I will never teach that, but it is a path, and it is a good path. It is an effective path. And that's why I want to, over the next weeks, begin to teach it. But let me add this. What I mentioned is that recovery means becoming healthy. You want to know what that therefore means? The 12 steps aren't just for addicts. The 12 steps are for people who are unhealthy. People who have maybe not addiction, but man, they've got emotional problems. They got psychological problems. They got relationship problems. They've got all the unhealthiness, just not the addiction. They will benefit from the steps just as much as an addict. Because it's really in the long run, though it says we're powerless over drugs and alcohol, and it's working towards becoming sober, the emphasis really becomes becoming healthy. And you don't have to be an addict to need to become more healthy. And so I really hope that you, whether you're an addict or not, will say, maybe it would be beneficial for me to walk through these steps. And maybe I will come out the other end healthier after I've worked hard and gone through some pain, but maybe I'll come out healthier. And that is my prayer for you. Let's just pray. Father, I just thank you that you have given us the guidance that we need in order to become healthy, and yet everything in us resists it. And often we need to hit the bottom of addiction or the bottom of a divorce or the bottom of a death in order to finally get honest with ourselves that we need to change and that we're not healthy. And I pray you'd help each one here to have an open heart. Amen.